First of all, thank you, Paul, for bringing the community back together. And we're here to discuss a family of materials today called PHA, polyhydroxyalkanoate. I would like to do a very quick raise of hands. Who does not know about PHA? Great. Everybody knows about PHA. So we'll keep this part very short, and then we'll dive straight into the panel, because we have three people that are engaged in manufacturing and using PHAs. So we will detail about the latest developments, and also we have some samples. So if everybody before lunch wants to look and feel, we can also do that. So very briefly on what are PHAs. So PHA is a natural polymer family. So within the polyhydroxyalkanoate biopolymer segment, we have a huge amount of PHA types, and PHAs are around us everywhere, right? So from microbial cells, it's estimated that around 40% of all microbial cells is actually producing some sort of PHA. And these microbes are using that as an energy storage or a carbon store for future use. But also, and some people don't know this, PHA has also been isolated and identified in plant cells and even in mammalian cells. So that's good to know. And a lot of people would like to know, okay, what is actually the fundamental difference with, for example, other biopolymers, biopolyesters like PLA, PBS, and other materials that we know? Well, the main fundamental difference here is that these kind of polymers are made still through chemical synthesis. So monomers are being used and are polymerized in microbial cells. And for PHA, this is totally different. So we call this the biological synthesis. So like a tree is producing a cellulose molecule, this is also happening with PHA in a microbial cell. So that's quite different. And because they are so natural, occurring in nature, and also biologically synthesized, they're very much recognizable for enzymes, for bacteria, to break them down in nature as well. The beauty is that if we look at the bacterial cell, and you see the cell boundary here, is that by feeding these microbes, so first of all, we have many different microbial strains that can make different types of PHA, but by feeding them also different feedstocks, sugars, fatty acids, amino acids, but also other sources of carbon-rich feedstocks, you can tailor and tweak what sort of PHA polymer you're producing. And this goes from very short polymer chains to very long polymer chains. And of course, that drastically affects also the performance. So we already know that PHAs are around us everywhere, right? But also, PHAs biodegrade almost anywhere, right? So this is a study done by OWS and Nova Institute and a few other consortium partners, which shows a comparison between the biodegradation behavior and the composting behavior of different PHAs next to starch, PLA, PBAT, and so on. And you see here by the fact that all the boxes are ticked green, it can be anaerobically digested, it can be composted in home composting, but also it can biodegrade in marine conditions, for example. And the beauty is also that we can very nicely connect the manufacturing of PHA with renewable carbon feedstocks, right? So you see on the top left corner that we can also very nicely connect PHA production to waste streams of other industries. So is it CO2, is it biogas, is it used cooking oils, or any form of other carbon-rich content, even organic waste, and we'll discuss that in a moment a bit further, can be used to manufacture PHAs. But also bio-based routes, right? Vegetable oils, sugar, starches, etc. And the beauty of the whole platform, which is currently developing, there are commercial grades out there, but the beauty is that by tailoring the pathway to production, we can make a whole range of materials, and we expect that around 50% or maybe even more of all fossil-based polymers that we have and are using today can be replaced by certain PHA polymers, right? So we can modify the feedstocks, we can modify the microbial types, we can use natural strains, but also we can do, of course, genetical engineering as well. You have your production pathways, which in the end results in different PHA polymers. And now what we also see is that people are combining the different PHA polymers, a more elastomeric, a more brittle product together, and making very nice compounds that can service a whole range of applications. So we're just, the PHA industry has been around for a while, but we're still scratching the surface of what's possible. I would say we're at the very beginning of the S-curve, but we have some beautiful news to share as well in respect to upscaling, because I've just made a few snapshots of what's happening in the last 6 months. We have breaking the ground of a new plant in China, 25 kilotons. We have an existing commercial player, Kaneka, that's increasing capacity, 10,000 tons. CJ Bio just opened their first plant in Indonesia, 5 kilotons. And we have all sorts of demonstration factories opening all around the world, making different types of PHA. So this is great news. So with respect to application development, we see a lot of collaborations happening, from packaging products to films, coatings, agricultural applications, but also durable applications, functional ingredients, and of course, food serviceware. And then lastly, before we dive into the details of the panel discussion, we have created Go PHA, which stands for the Global Organization for PHA. It's a growing community of people that would like to get started with either making, converting, or using PHA. And by now we're around 60 partners. It's a very healthy mix of producers, brands, converters, and even academia. So if you want to do something with PHA, just reach out to us and we can see what we can do together. So for now, I would like to invite my colleagues, Jonathan, Amir, and Robert on the stage. So let's start with a brief introduction. Robert, would you like to start? Sure. What are you doing in the field of PHA?
Yeah, so my name is Robert. I'm from Genecis Bioindustries. We're based in Toronto, Canada, and essentially we upcycle organic waste into PHAs. So we take municipal waste, or the waste that will be left over from our lunch today, and then we can turn that into PHAs. The feedstock cost can actually represent 40 to 60% of the cost of production of PHA. So by using waste, we're actually able to drive down that cost of production. And we're a team of about 30 people, Series A stage, raised about 12 million USD to date. Half of that is grant, half of that is equity. So happy to share some more information today.
Okay, thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Amir Afshar. I'm one of the co-founders at Shellworks. At Shellworks, our mission's always been to make plastic waste a thing of the past. The way that we do that is slightly downstream of what Robert mentioned. So we specialize in compounding with PHA, so we've been doing this for about 2.5 years, and combining PHA with other natural or biological building blocks. And then we take that, and then we have a specialism also in preparing that for molding and then mechanical engineering understanding. So we provide final product to customers. We're focused on the personal care and beauty space right now, providing them with packaging solutions. I have some here with me today, so you're more than welcome to come and have a look. We're kind of ramping up at the moment, so we just closed the seed round fundraising. Our team is about 8, and we're growing to 15. And we're able to ship around 200,000 units on a monthly basis, starting with a big launch we're doing at the end of July.
And I'm Jonathan Kneebone from a company called Phantm, based in Australia. So thanks, Rick, for convincing me last week that I should come, and I booked my flights on Sunday. And it's wonderful to be back out in the world after having our borders shut down for a couple of years. So Phantom's been around for about 2 years. We're a company with a big vision, which is a plastic-free planet. And I guess our theory for change for achieving that is by making PHA. So like Genecis, we're trying to make it out of waste streams. The first waste stream that we're targeting to make PHA was waste whey from making ricotta and mozzarella cheese. So it's a high carbon content feedstock that can be readily fermented and converted into PHA. I guess from the slides that Rick showed, you will have seen, I think it was about slide 9 and 10, we talk about manufacturers and then applications. And there's a bit of a gap there. So at Phantm, we're working out how we can play a bit more of a role in the downstream aspects to help bring PHA onto the market. My role at Phantm is Head of Advocacy and Growth, so I've had a career as a lawyer for many years, working with Indigenous people on mining and oil and gas applications, and also in policy and for the private sector. So we see our role at Phantm as both enablers for change, for changing systems by using PHA and commercial applications to affect that.
Okay, thank you. So first question, I think for you, Robert. I just explained about all the different feedstock options, right? So as a manufacturer of PHA, how do you see people entering the PHA segment or are willing to enter that space? What are the different type of feedstock strategies that people can look at, and how also does the feedstock that you're using, how does that affect the actual product that you're ending up with?
Yeah, so we're generally feedstock agnostic. You could use sugars, you could use oils, you could use waste streams. But we do see the long-term value in exploring waste as a feedstock because it can help drive down the cost of production. At the end of the day, the benefit of using living organisms is you could engineer them to basically produce any chemical, any material that you want, irrespective of the waste stream. And it requires a bit of work. How do we take this heterogeneous feedstock from urban centers and convert it into something that's homogeneous and consistent so that we can make very functional and consistent end polymers? And that's something we're doing on the technological front. We have 2 fermentation steps. One is basically take something that's mixed, turn it into something consistent, and then make the materials out of that. So there's also benefits of using waste because we can tap into existing waste infrastructure like biogas plants. And as a result, we can actually significantly drop the capex. We don't have to build expensive production sites. We can leverage existing sites out there.
Mm-hmm. So what sort of PHAs are you manufacturing actually? Because you're using organic waste. So is there a big range, versatility that you can still tailor by picking the organic waste route, or can you still have a whole range of products that you can create?
Yeah, so we make a PHA called PHBV. It's a copolymer. So we're actually able to adjust the monomeric ratios to create different types of end applications, all the way from a rigid application up to a flexible film, for example. So traditionally, you'd actually have to add propionic acid, petroleum-based, to your bacteria to create more flexible applications. PHA is notoriously known to be very brittle. So by creating this copolymer, we're actually able to replicate a lot of different types of petroleum plastics, polyethylene, polypropylene, and the works.
And I think you're also working on applications that are also relating to this exact space, right? Working with the organic materials, coffee, and those kind of products. Could you tell a bit more about that?
Yeah, so we're focused on some certain initial applications that we see high value in the premium food packaging, medical plastic space, and also 3D printing space. Our ideal scenario is when we collect food waste in the green bin, we also want to be able to collect PHA in the green bin. So put all of that organic material, take it to our production sites, reconvert that into a fully circular loop. So for example, if you're creating a coffee pod for a Keurig machine or an espresso, can you put that with the coffee grounds and other food waste into the same bin and have a fully circular loop within the waste management infrastructure?
Yeah, exciting. I think that brings us also to the next topic, and that's application development, right? Mm-hmm. And this can be, for some people entering the space, at least that's what I heard or what I hear a lot, can be quite a pain. Or at least there's kind of a ramp-up period that you have to allow yourself to get started with PHA. So, Amir, you have commercial products. You brought some samples here. It looks very good. I actually have, for people interested, I have also some pens made from PHBH, also a different type of PHA. So the products are out there, but what is required, and how did you see, your road towards getting to a commercial product?
Yeah, I think when we first came across PHA, one of the things that we heard is it's a great material, but it's incredibly difficult to work with. I guess in part that's true, and I think it's a case of understanding how to work with it and understanding that it's a little bit different to, for example, polypropylene. So polypropylene, you throw it into any mold, in any machine, it works. You don't really have to know what you're doing. I think with PHA, there's a little bit of a learning curve, and what we have kind of specialized in and spent the last 2 years understanding and tweaking is that actually it's a little bit different, the approach that you need to take, and we start with an application in mind. So we say, okay, we're trying to create this component, and then we go back to the formulation step and we see how can we modify the material. I think the key thing is always patience. It's a little bit of a temperamental material, it's a natural material, so it can have its ups and downs, but when it performs, it really, really performs very, very well. So I think what we're trying to do is kind of help brands or help people who are trying to work with PHA to be able to prepare specific blends for their application and also take them through the process of the application as well. So, we have specialisms also in designing molding. There's slight nuances. Not that it's a completely new technology, it's a standard mold, but the way that comes together or the engineering principles behind it are slightly more tailored towards PHAs. So I think there's definitely a lot of opportunity space. It's definitely not impossible to learn. I think we're just here and we want to share that if people want to work with PHA, we'd be more than happy to help them through that process.
Yeah, so very great. So, it's always the show and tell, right? So you have this product here. Can you tell us a little bit more about this particular product? What sort of PHA are you using? What sort of process did you walk through to get to this particular product? And also, do you have experience with other PHAs, for example, than what you're using now?
Yeah, so the products we make right now are made from PHB, which is kind of one of the more readily available PHAs on the market. We have, as I say, a lot of processing that we do to get that material ready to scale. And I think as you go up in scales, also you have sometimes different challenges. In terms of the way that we design products, also I think we're looking at how can we reduce material. So it's not just a case of saying let's just dump a bunch of material in. And once you start to reduce that material, you start to have some mechanical challenges that you need to address. That's why we look at other biological building blocks or minerals and things that we can put in to help stabilize that. In terms of the general PHA space, we're very interested in exploring other PHAs. We've been looking at PHBH, for example, P34HB. These are more, P34HB is a more amorphous polymer from CJ, is one of the bigger producers of that. So it really starts to give you a bit of a wide application space, and I think there's interesting literature also to demonstrate how if you start to blend some of these PHAs together, you can have a whole range of different material properties. This becomes very interesting from an application point of view because you can have a component that has many different material functionalities or material properties, but ultimately is one material family. So the end of life can stay the same, but you can have a lot of different functionality. So for us in the cosmetic space, this is really important because there's often not there's not assemblies that are monomaterial. They're often made of many different materials. So even if you're trying to recycle a product, it's very difficult if it's made of many different types of plastic. So PHA there is we think, quite a good application space.
How do you work with like blends with combinations of other materials? Did you also explore this, TPS or PBS or other materials in that space? And the same for like additive packages. Can you find the right performance additives as well for making these sort of products?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I mean, one of our core principles is that we don't use anything that's petroleum derived. A couple of reasons for that. I mean, in principle, we're trying to make sure that we don't affect the end-of-life properties of the material. So if something doesn't have the same end-of-life profile, for us it's not a goer because it's going to ultimately have detriment to that process. That said, there are a lot of, we've seen some of them over the conference. There's a lot of biologically derived similar materials. Sometimes you have some issues with miscibility, but there's ways to also help facilitate that. And then with other additive packages, it's just a case of testing and seeing what works. To be honest, a lot of the time it does behave like conventional plastics, where you have a set of additive packages, whether mineral or otherwise, that you can introduce into the material, and it works quite well. But in other cases, there are some challenges in terms of viscosity and melt flow when you're introducing other additive packages.
I think it's very interesting because we also see a lot of activity looking for the synergy with other material platforms. So a lot of PHAs in the end ending up also in compounds and blends with different biopolymers or different materials. And also we see it as a performance, beneficial product for example, for cellulose-based materials. So you see a lot of application development in coatings, in binders for all sorts of bio-based blends as well, right? So this is also, I think, a very interesting space to work in.
Yeah, it behaves very well with cellulose.
Yeah.
So it can incorporate cellulose quite well and still maintain quite a high level of hydrophobicity, even at quite high loadings. So this is quite interesting, both for applications of coating, but also as fillers, basically. Yeah.
Thank you. So, Jonathan, in your journey, I know, from your background, you're working a lot with regulators and, let's say, the wider material adoption stakeholders network, right? So, what is the overall perception on the use of PHA, and how do people perceive it, or how does regulation affect PHA these days?
Yeah, I seem to have spent much of my career working in flawed policy spaces. And I guess working with PHA and a new material is instructive in that regard. And I think it was Sjoerd yesterday from Covestra who talked about the decades of investment that have been made in the fossil fuel industry. And it made me think about how systems, they're humanly devised constructs that are put together by people, and how often we need to then unwind them and build them again. And certainly in the case of PHA, that's what I've come up against, is that often when you talk to regulators, politicians, NGOs, etc., no one in this room put their hand up when asked whether they knew what PHA is, but that's not the case out in the wider world where regulation is taking place. And so for us at Phantm, and this is our Australian experience, but it's the same we know from our engagement with Go PHA, that it's a global experience, that the first conversation is typically about education and helping regulators and policymakers and NGOs understand what PHA is and remove some of the mystique and intrigue about it and educate and so on. I guess that then feeds into another comment about the investment that's gone into systems and what they are. And one thing that we often come up against in the PHA world is that it doesn't fit into existing recycling streams. So that's a barrier to entry. We have to educate people about how it performs. And I guess thinking about scenarios that we'd like to see at Phantm and in the PHA world, which is a plastic-free planet, thinking about the systems and end-of-life situations that we need to develop and the investment that needs to occur there. And so the scenario we see at present is that really it's the end-of-life, the waste management sector that's dictating materials use, rather than the other way around, people understanding what materials are, how they perform, and what the best ones are to get out into the market. So that's a challenge that we're overcoming. And then a tool for getting there is certifications. I think it was Amanda from Pangaea mentioned before about greenwashing being a problem in the market. It's a problem that we all encounter globally. There's a lot of claims being made, lack of transparency, many brands doing their best to try and do that. And I guess in terms of regulation, the function of certifications to make sure that there's rigorous, transparent and objective standards out there is incredibly important. And there's a real gap in that regard for PHA. So I guess all of those problems coalesce when it comes to PHA. So we take the approach that was mentioned previously about making sure that there's collaboration, relationship building, education, and really working with people to help understand what this material is and what it can do.
How do you work with application development in relation to this? So for each application that you're targeting, do you look at the specific regulations in place, or how do you interact with those value chains, especially also on that end-of-life aspect that you just mentioned?
Yes, I guess with value chains and particular applications, we tend to, in terms of certifications, have generic type of standards that tell you a particular performance for a broad range of materials. I guess what we'd like to see is more specific standards set so that people understand, like you showed that image before from Nova Institute of how a material performs in particular environments, so that when consumers pick up something from the shelf that tells them, they understand what's in the product, what different types of materials it's comprised of, and also how it performs in different environments. So whether it will break down in your home compost, how it performs in the sea. Whereas at the moment, we tend to just have a really general approach to things. So you kind of, you get a perception that it's a good material, but actually it might perform very differently in your own environment.
I think the title that we have here is the scale up of natural PHAs, right? So we just published a report. The current installed capacity is around 50 kilotons and then it's still divided over different types of PHA, right? So it's fairly small. But by 2027 we expect a tenfold of this, and this is already from committed upscaling activity. So this is quite exciting. But for example, Amir, if tomorrow Pangaea is knocking your door, are you able to cope with these kind of volumes, or how does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think even though the material is somewhat constrained today, what we often say to customers is it really depends on what you're trying to achieve and how can we achieve it, because the material is available. It's not all being utilized. So some of it's going into other compounds, some of it's being used for R&D development. So, for example, we had access this year to 5,000 tons. We're only using 40 tons of that. So I think we're always saying to brands, come to us and we can figure out a way to move forward. I think we're really keen to try and promote PHA and also to help people understand how to use it and when to use it. So, I mean, I think we're excited about the prospect of the coming years.
And I think what you mentioned is also very relevant because indeed, like with any new material platform, each of the different application areas needs to be developed, right? So what you have now is an injection molded application. We know that, for example, in textiles for fashion products, for example, there's quite a lot of activity, but it's not quite there yet on commercial scale. But we see films, we see coatings, we see all sorts of developments. And of course, a lot of materials needed also for these kind of developments as well. So, Jonathan, also for you, what do you think like the wider bio markets community or any other stakeholders that may be in the room here can mean for PHA in this upscaling journey?
I guess I'm really enthused by conversations like this. We don't have them in the Asia-Pacific region on the same scale. I think markets in Asia particularly are enormous. I think the approach that Europe takes to building public-private partnerships in terms of funding and supporting novel ideas is really instrumental, and if that could be globalized, I think would be fantastic for helping scale up and build more capacity.
Mm-hmm. And then last question for you, Robert, same on the upscaling. So we know that developing a highly efficient producing microbe is a very tedious process, right? So how do you see the upscaling? How can we accelerate that upscaling of this installed capacity of PHA? How do you see that from Genecis' perspective?
Yeah, so there's a big market pull. People are constantly asking us for material. The question is, how do we supply that market need? And we know how versatile PHAs are. Can replace about 50% of petroleum plastics based on functionality. So the question is, how do we do it? And we're doing a distributed production model where we bolt onto waste infrastructure. So instead of building a massive fermentation facility in Southeast Asia or somewhere in the US, every urban center can actually have PHA production hubs based on their waste streams so that we can have local supply chains, local production, and feed into that way. We recently received a $6 million project from the Canadian government to integrate with the largest biogas plant in Canada. So with that model, we're actually going to prove out this concept, and ideally it's kind of a plug and play where we can do it at one site, but then scale it across North America, Europe, or Asia. And I think it's a unique way of scaling biotechnology because, again, we've noticed there's a gap between the benchtop or the pilot scale and the commercial scale where there's a lack of capacity there. So ideally, I think we need all stakeholders to be in full steam ahead. But it's clear that there's a lot of demand, and we're working our hardest to supply that demand.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's really exciting time to be in the PHA space or to use PHA. Like I mentioned, we are scratching the surface of what's possible, and still already so much is possible, right? I think together as an industry, there's quite some challenges in the different application development routes, in the upscaling, but also in creating a competitive product next to fossil-based materials, which is of course also not so easy, but I think prices have dropped tremendously over the past few years already, so this is a very good trend. I think we're open to discuss with anybody that may have some questions, wants to get started with either the production side or the conversion side. at least from my side, I'm very excited by the presentations from Pangai and other brands that are experimenting so much with new materials. So I would like to really applaud for that. And if anybody wants to get engaged with PHA, just reach out to us. Thank you.